Hello everyone, this is Superhero Rewind and I'm Captain Logan. Considering how many sequels are just made to milk more money out of their predecessors, it's interesting to me that some of the greatest comic book films ever made are sequels. That's not to say, of course, that some of the worst aren't also sequels. X-Men is a good film, but when compared to X2, it feels like a dress rehearsal, as if Bryan Singer needed some practice time before he could make the film he really wanted to. I don't know if X2 could have been made without the first, and it's good to know the character setup before going into it, especially with Wolverine, Professor X, and Magneto. I do know that I've seen the first film maybe half a dozen times, and X2 at least twice that many. X-Men is a good film, but X2 is a great film. The themes are the same, freedom, racial prejudice, all that good stuff, but they're given a deeper emotional resonance because of the more carefully crafted characterization, and frankly, a way more thrilling, complex, and interesting plot. William Stryker finds a way to control mutants, and uses Nightcrawler to attempt to assassinate the president in order to rekindle support for the Mutant Registration Act. He also manages to kidnap a number of the X-Men and mutants from the X-Mansion, including Cyclops and Professor X. He steals Cerebro, and then uses Professor X to try and kill every living mutant on the planet. It also turns out that Stryker is responsible for Wolverine's past, and Wolverine hopes to get answers from him, ultimately deciding that protecting the world from Stryker is more important than finding out where he came from. In the end, Magneto tries to reverse Stryker's Cerebro to target humans, but the X-Men stop him, and Jean Grey sacrifices her life to get everyone in the X-Jet off of Alkali Lake alive. But there is hope that she isn't gone for good. X2 is paced much better than the original. It's bigger, more epic, but it also knows when to slow down and give us some good character moments. Some of these scenes, like Wolverine putting a cigarette out in his own hand, help to lighten up the mood of a film that does get very dark and has a pretty heavy message. They also help make these characters more real and help us care about them more. When you make a film with such a huge ensemble cast, there isn't time to flesh everyone out completely and give them their own major subplots. But if you can give each of them short moments, showing them doing things real people might do in the same situation, you make the audience believe them. And then there are scenes like the one where Iceman cools off a soda for Wolverine, which diffuses what could have been a really irritating pseudo-love triangle between Wolverine, Iceman, and Rogue, but it also puts the audience at ease, just before a very violent, intense scene of Wolverine stabbing dozens of soldiers to death. That scene is more effective because we're given a very human moment between Iceman and Wolverine just before they're put into danger. This is, hands down, the definitive example of how to do two villains in the same movie. Stryker and Magneto aren't buddies. They don't team up, and when one of them dies, it doesn't seem contrived or thrown in just because we have to see someone we don't like fall off the edge of a cliff or explode into a million pieces. I hope I'm not the only person thinking of Venom at this very moment. Stryker and Magneto are both, air quotes, bad guys. But they're also enemies of each other. This is fantastic. They're both given dimension and emotional depth so that even if we don't like one or both of them, we care about what happens to them. The same argument is raised from the first film. Should mutants simply accept that humans are in charge and find a way to live peacefully in that world, as Professor X would have it, or should they take over because they're the next stage of evolution which makes them superior, as Magneto would have it? But Stryker brings a whole new side to this argument. Sure, you had Senator Kelly in the first film wanting to curb mutant liberties and all that, but he wasn't talking about genocide. Stryker is Magneto, only a human version. He thinks humans are the superior race and mutants are a disease that needs to be wiped out. And it's beautiful because while he's afraid of mutants, Magneto is afraid of him. They both have exactly the same motives, fear, and also revenge. Humans repeatedly have hurt Magneto, first as a child in a Nazi internment camp, and now as an adult in a different kind of prison, used by Stryker like an animal to get what he needs from him, information about Cerebro. And mutants have hurt Stryker too. The hallucinations caused by his son drove Stryker's wife to put a power drill to her own temple. This isn't just another contrived villain backstory. He's truly made human here. I'm not saying he isn't a monster, but the fact that he turned out that way is believable. So now, rather than Magneto and Professor X being two sides of the same coin, Magneto and Stryker are, and Professor X is right in the middle. He believes both men are monsters, and in the end, his X-Men have to stop them both. I also like how personal this becomes for Magneto. Before, he seemed to see humans more abstractly. They are the enemy. They oppress us. It is us or them. But with Stryker, they are given a face, and Stryker confirms everything Magneto believes about humanity. Thus, he decides he has to change his strategy, telling Professor X that humans aren't playing by his rules anymore, so it's time to play by theirs. Instead of trying to make everyone mutants, he's now decided he must wipe humanity out completely. Stryker is actually worse than he is, and he is made even more of a monster by turning into what Stryker already believes all mutants are. Okay, now that I'm finished with my thesis paper, Wolverine's origin is handled very well here, and although I enjoyed X-Men Origins Wolverine more than most people, it did defeat a lot of what was done here. The glimpses we're given of the Weapon X program and what is said about Wolverine's involvement falls far more in line with the comics than X-Men Origin does. More than once, we hear a voice from his past say he will have no memory. It's really a shame that the new Wolverine film didn't remember this, because the adamantium bullet thing was already stupid without being reminded they also contradicted already established continuity. One of the coolest story points in this movie is having Wolverine go to Alkali Lake at the beginning, not find anything, and then have all the important events culminate there in the final act. That's the place where all the answers are, and he was standing on top of it within the first 10 minutes of the film. As with the first movie, this one isn't really about every character, but as I said before, they're all given good moments, except of course for Cyclops, who's completely underused. He seems to be taken out early so they'd have one less character to worry about, and that's only a problem because he's supposed to be the team's leader. Rogue is probably the least used of the major characters from the first film, but it's fair to say there wasn't a lot left to say about her, unless of course she had a way to touch people without hurting them. I guess we'll see where that idea goes in my next X-Men review. I really like what's done with Iceman. He's young and inexperienced, but he's not a brooding, irritating teenager, just one with real problems that he tries to solve rather than avoiding them. I like how he handles his family when we see them, but I don't like them at all. Whose little brother would call the cops when he finds out his big brother can turn tea into ice? This is a rare example of people in this movie not acting like people, unfortunately. The idea is that people attack what they don't understand, but that isn't always true, and it shouldn't be portrayed that way. My little brother would probably ask me to make him a milkshake or turn the backyard into a skating rink. And then there's the scene where Iceman's mom says, "Have you tried not being a mutant?" A funny line, but this stuff just makes all humans look really stupid. New characters. Nightcrawler looks great. He's portrayed very close to the comics. I love the Catholic stuff, and his scene with Storm about how he pities humans does a lot to make both characters sympathetic. I do wish he was given more to do than get brainwashed and then ride around with the X-Men all movie, trying to tell people his name, but just getting interrupted every time. And this leads to my biggest nitpick of the film. How does Professor X know what mutant to look for after Nightcrawler tries to kill the president? He can't get a good lock on Nightcrawler with Cerebro, and he doesn't seem to even know he's a teleporter, so presumably he can't even lock on the memory of the president being attacked. Nightcrawler also has a pretty good scene with Mystique, and I'm glad that's there since she's his mother in the comics, but I wish it was made a little clearer if that's the case here. I'm not saying their familiar relation should be a big plot point, but I wish I knew if fans were supposed to take that from that scene, or if it's just coincidence. Pyro is handled with a lot more dimension than he often got in the comics. It's like they gave him all the dimension they forgot to give Sabretooth and Toad in the last movie. He's also a good opposite for Iceman. He's given a very clear choice to follow Professor X or Magneto, and he makes his choice believably. Too bad Anakin Skywalker's road to the dark side couldn't have been handled this well. Lady Deathstrike. Well, she's a little closer to Sabretooth or Toad, but her fight with Wolverine is a pleasure to watch, and after all, it's hard to develop a character who's brainwashed an entire film. I didn't like the triangle between Logan, Scott, and Jean in the first movie, and I don't like it here either. Once again, it's only there because it's in the comics, not because Wolverine has any reason to be so infatuated with Jean. The Jean Grey Phoenix thing. Maybe it would be cooler if they didn't botch it up so bad in 3, but when I first saw this, I geeked out about the Phoenix gliding in the water thing because I knew what it was supposed to be. And her powers glitching all movie, the hint of Phoenix eyes and flames, that's all great, but I don't buy her death at the end, and it should have been less contrived. She gets out of the jet and telekinetically controls the water, but there's no good reason she had to leave in order to do that. Wolverine asks why she left the plane, and Professor X answers, because she made a choice. That's not a good enough reason, Professor X. That's like responding to, why did my girlfriend just jump off a cliff and commit suicide with, because she felt like it. The only other nitpick I'd like to mention is Magneto reversing Cerebro. He has Mystique turn into Stryker and tell Jason to have Professor X target all the humans instead of mutants. Okay, fine. Then why does he have to move all the panels around in the room? The one in the X-Mansion has all its panels filled in, and they never move. It's a really cool effect, but it doesn't seem to serve any practical purpose at all. Despite my few quibbles, I consider X2 to be one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, and I give it a 4 out of 4. A perfect example of how to make a sequel better than the original, how to build on previous material, and how to take over-the-top comic book ideas and give them real weight and meaning. Next time I'll be doing a very different kind of superhero movie, the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. I hope you'll join me.